Thank you very much. Yeah, that's right. Mary has brilliantly explained how new technologies are changing the way immigrants see immigration and deal with that phenomenon. I would like to talk about how new technologies are changing, or better to say, distorting the way that local populations in Western countries see and interact with this phenomenon. I'm going to give you an overarching view of some of the things that I've been studying for the past 5 years, and then my colleague Carlo, he's going to give you a more detailed example based on Germany, 2015, 2017, I think. Anyway, I would like to start by saying that in terms of topics, when we analyze the topics, we realize that new technologies had brought no novelty to the debate on immigration. When you analyze the fake news around immigration, you basically see that they use the same stereotypes and ideas that were out for the past 500, 600 years. I'm summarizing here the 4 that I think are the key ones. The first one is the idea of an ongoing immigrant invasion, that it will immediately reshape the balance and the cultural equilibrium of national populations, right? This idea was already present in Europe, in early modern Europe. Here you have an example taken from Spain, 16th century. And it's basically being used in many of these disinformation campaigns that we have nowadays in Europe. Here you have an example taken from the last general elections in Italy, produced by Sputnik, which, as you know, is a media outlet based in Russia. The idea of an immigrant invasion is often reinforced by images like this one. These photographs were shared by thousands of people in Italy during the elections. They were retweeted by figures such as the vice president of the Italian Senate. And apparently they saw thousands of immigrants in Libya trying to cross to Italy. The truth is that these images were taken in 1991 in Albania, and they are basically displaying an immigration from Europe and not from Africa to Europe, right? So that gives you an idea. Another myth that we see often in fake news regarding immigration today is the idea that foreign cultures such as Islam are going to gain dominance and a very powerful influence over American and Western and European societies in the coming decade, right? Many fake news are built to reinforce this fear. Here you have a recent example. After the fire that destroyed part of Notre Dame de Paris, we saw many media outlets in Europe saying that Macron was considering the possibility of including minarets in the new roof, so it will represent better modern and diverse France. He never said that. Although if you ask me, maybe it's a good idea, I don't know. Anyway, a third idea that we often see related with fake news is that immigrants are always violent and dangerous for national populations, right? On social media, on blogs, on the mouth of many far-right populist leaders in Europe, what we see is the idea that migrants are associated with crime, murder, terrorism, and rape. There are hundreds of examples of this. This one comes from Germany. There's a website called Rape Refugees that apparently displays a map where you can see all the sex crimes committed by refugees or immigrants in Germany in 2016. There's one study by The Spiegel which has analyzed all this data. And basically, they've discovered that only 21% of those supposed crimes were committed actually by refugees. The rest being committed by German citizens, European citizens, or just unknown criminals we don't know their nationality. And in fact, many of them, they never even happen. They are just made out for this. And actually, when you look at the official data of the German state, you see that immigrants are related with 9% of sex crimes that were committed in Germany in 2017. So it's not the 80–90% that this website is trying to convey. Similar fake statistics can be found in any other Western country, especially in the United States. We've seen a lot of that because of President Trump, even if evidence shows us that migrants are not associated with more criminal activity, but rather the opposite. As you can see here, first-generation migrants are better citizens than national ones, and after they spend a few decades in those countries, they start acquiring those same patterns of criminal activity. One last idea that we often see displayed is that immigrants live on benefits and that they get better support from the national state than citizens themselves, right? So for instance, in Spain, in the past general election, around 15% of the content of the fake news that were circulated in WhatsApp were associated to this idea. And here you get an example that displays apparently two stories. Jorge, an Spanish citizen who apparently lost his home, and he had to live 1 year in the streets before he could get a public shelter. As opposed to the story of Mohammed, a Nigerian immigrant who illegally crossed to Spain and immediately got a public shelter, 900 euros stipend a month, and even a free cell phone. This is all false. Jorge is actually a Greek citizen who turned 101 years old a few years ago, and he appeared in the news because of that. And Mohammed is Nigerian, but he was captured in India because of illegal drug trafficking several years ago. So it has nothing to do, he's never been in Spain. Anyway, estimates are that around 25% of the voting population of Spain saw this kind of fake news related to immigration during the election campaign. Now, the real question here is whether this had an impact in their voting behavior. This is the real doubt, right? And this connects us with the new things, the many new things that digital technologies have brought to the anti-immigration debate. I'm going to share with you just 4 main key points here. The first one has to do with the scale and the pace at which fake news now circulates. Now, in the past, you needed a significant amount of time and resources in order to put together an impactful misinformation campaign. Think, for instance, in Nazi Germany's Ministry of Propaganda and Enlightenment, that had a running budget every year of approximately the equivalence of $700 million nowadays, and hundreds of people working for it, right? Nowadays, just a few guys with very cheap equipment and no real money, they can reach an audience of thousands or millions of people in a matter of hours or days because of the combination of social media, big data, and automated agents. And just so you get an idea of the scale of this, there's a study that estimates that between 9 and 15% of all the current accounts on Twitter are automated. So we're talking about here that there are around 50 million people, 50 million bots active on that social network. This situation, coupled with the fact that anti-immigration users are far more active in social networks than pro-immigration ones, is created a distortion and an imbalance in the way that citizenships and politicians perceive the debates on immigration and immigration itself. An example I want to show you this data taken from the Italian general election, the 6 months leading to it. And if you analyze what happened in Twitter in that period, you see that there were around 100,000 people who were publishing comments on immigration in Italian, right? Of those, and those 100,000 users can be divided in 3 communities: pro-immigration, anti-immigration, and some neutral in the middle. Now, the pro-immigration community was formed by 42,000 users, and they posted 200,000 tweets, right? Which account for 27% of the whole conversation. The anti-immigration community, on the other hand, was comprised by 25,000 users, and they published more than 500,000 tweets, which is 68% of the total debate. In other words, the anti-immigration community was 2.5 times more active than the pro-immigration one. And because of that, they managed to create the sensation that in the country that the majority of Italians supported an anti-immigration agenda. And more importantly, they also managed to create the impression that immigration was a big issue and a big problem in Italy, when it is actually not, right? Now, people we know that tend to oversight the number of immigrants living in their country or reaching their city. But the problem is that the overexposure that they are suffering because of social networks is increasing this sensation that there are too many immigrants and that there is a crisis going on and there is a threat to them, right? Now, a second thing is that because digital fake news are becoming so cheap and so easy, we are seeing now the appearance of many non-state small actors in the conversation. Actors that previously were excluded from the big game of disinformation, now they are there. So if you could see a map of disinformation 50 years ago, what you will see is like 2 or 3 big agents polluting the conversation of the majority of the population. Now you don't see that anymore. You see it's much more spread. Research shows that with some exceptions, the majority of content, fake content on immigration is produced by individuals or small groups, small institutions, not connected with governments, and all this is making much harder to fight with those agents. Another important novelty, the third one, is that for the first time, digital misinformation on immigrants is being used to damage not only the interest of those communities that are migrating, but also the interest of the nations that are welcoming or are receiving those communities by creating social division, fear, and political discontent, right? This is definitely what Russia is trying to do, or what Russian agents are trying to do. This country hosts many of the bots and media outlets that are polluting the debate on immigration in Europe and the United States. And the interesting thing is that it's not that Russia has a particular agenda on immigration like they had during the Cold War in economy, for instance, right? Putin has no particular problem with Moroccans going to Spain or Portugal. That's, you know, it doesn't matter to him really. What he wants is to take advantage of the situation to weaken the European Union. The Kremlin knows that immigration is a very divisive topic, and they're using it to cause fear and fracture and anti-establishment feelings in European countries and beyond that. So in other words, it's weaponizing the immigration topic. Now, one last novelty that I think is important that is being introduced by digital technologies has to do with the way misinformation spreads and affects the public. Now, as you know, we all now live in echo chambers. The way the Google search algorithm and our social network work makes that we are constantly, we live in closed system in which we only see those pieces of information, comments, photographs that reinforce our ideas and our feelings, and we never see something that comes outside that, right? That's what is called the filter bubble that, you know, we could discuss a lot about it, but there's some truth in that. Now, there are a lot of evidence of this. Here you have a brief example taken from Germany. When you look at those are the websites that tend to have fake news, and especially on topics of immigration and Islam, although not only. And when you analyze who are the visitors of those websites and who are the people retweeting content from those websites, you see that 95% of them belong to the same group, which is the group that actually supports Alternative for Germany and this kind of anti-immigration and anti-Islam agendas in Germany. Now, this is very important. This is very important because what it's telling us, and this is an interpretation, we still don't have enough data to say whether this is true or not in all cases, but in my view, what this is telling us is digital misinformation is not causing the increase in anti-immigrant feelings in Western countries, which is probably caused by socioeconomic factors that are maybe related, but you know, they are not caused by misinformation. Fake news are basically preaching to the converted. They're only consumed, they're being produced and consumed by the people who already have an image, an idea about immigration, right? So it's not that if we see more people voting for certain parties, nativist parties in Europe or in the United States, it's not because they are being misinformed necessarily, right? What this is causing, though, is a polarization of the debate on immigration, and I think this is key. So instead of, because you're closing that filter bubble, what is happening is that those who defend immigration are becoming more and more supportive of immigration, and those who oppose immigration are becoming more radical opposers of immigration. It's polarizing the debate, and this is the real challenge that we're facing nowadays, because this is preventing societies to find a common ground and find common understandings on this topic. Thank you.